if my alternative is to go to the store and buy bags of fertilizer and
Yep.
bags of soil or whatever, what do the economics of it look like? Like, is it just as expensive to generate your own compost, or is it cheaper? And again, how much is needed?
Yep. So when you're making compost, typically the expense that most people don't allocate and why they end up buying it is the time. So if they've planned ahead a little bit and can make their own compost, that's the cheapest, best way to go. Normally what happens is people call during garden season and they say, hey, I want to get going now. And so for a 50-foot long bed that is of general normal width, we would recommend usually adding a bale or two of peat moss if it's soil like ours that's very alkaline. And along with that, we would typically like to add at least 5 to 10 cubic feet, 5 to 10 bags of compost for that row length, and you'll get much better results that year. But again, this is why we started Build a Soil, is a lot of times it's more convoluted. Sometimes it's a larger area and people will take the compost, they'll brew compost tea instead because it's more economic, and they'll use that as a liquid organic fertilizer throughout the growing season. But typically when I'm setting up a fresh garden and I've got fresh native soil, we're trying to affect the texture more than anything the first year. You can always add some organic fertilizer, but if it's rock hard and it doesn't have a good texture, it's not going to have a good root system and produce as well. So oftentimes what we'll do is we'll add small amounts of compost, minerals. And for instance, here in Western Colorado, we always add gypsum to the soil, and it's very, very important. And so we actually have a blog post, how to make your own complete organic fertilizer. And typically that's a great step for people to use in their own backyard garden, because when you have something complete that has the minerals, the calcium, as well as the main NPK, everything will grow very, very well. And the texture is the main difference. So that's why we add lots of compost.
What does the texture have to do with anything? I thought you were talking about nutrient density or,
Yep.
yield or things like that. So
Yep.
what are some of the metrics that compost helps with, and, how much does it help?
So when you add compost, we're adding organic matter to typical native soil that doesn't have any. And organic matter acts as a buffer to release the nutrients, to slowly break down over time, increase the water holding. And one of the things that we're talking about in the conversation with compost is the biology. And so when you have a dead native soil that's kind of rock hard, can't put a shovel in it, moistening it might help loosen it a little bit, but unless you improve the structure of it, you're not going to able to hold enough air and water in there for the biology to do its job, to deliver the nutrients. It makes it much harder for roots to grow into. So by applying compost to the top, or by amending it and working it into the top layer very slightly when we first start, we create a better texture. And when the plant starts to grow, that will enable it to hold the water and hold some air without being completely devoid of air because it's so hard. And then that will allow that process for the biology that's on the compost to release nutrients, make it available, and the plants do significantly better. And so ideal would be like our potting soil. It's as fluffy as can get. It's got the most amount of nutrients without causing problems. And that's about 20 to 30% compost by volume. That's a lot. And so when we look at like 1 acre, 6 inches deep, that's 807 cubic yards. So for us to put on an acre 20% compost, we're looking at 160 yards of compost, which to put it in perspective is, 412. So that's 4 massive truckloads, semi-truckloads full for 1 acre. That's too much. And so typically what we're doing when we have a home garden is we're usually building raised beds so that we can increase that fertility right away. If not, there'll be a fenced off area with a number of rows to plant the crops. And we'll make a recommendation for each row so that they can add the compost and the minerals. Now, here's the thing. On your lettuce patch, you may not need to add nearly as much. 1 or 2 cubic feet, just 2 bags of compost across a 50-foot row would be fine. But if you're producing more intensive, like tomatoes, peppers, things that might need a little more to produce, we would double that amount.